Good morning. Welcome to second webinar of Portugal Friend Christie's. Thank you for joining our session. Today we have two special guests, Luis Leon from Deloitte. Luis is a Deloitte partner and his area of expertise is personal income tax and social security. Luis has worked in personal income tax over the last 19 years and has assisted hundreds of people moving into Portugal. Rafael Chance is the founder and general manager for more than 20 years of Portugal Friend Christie's, chosen since 2012 by Christie's International Real Estate as an official affiliate in Portugal. Portugal Friend Christie's is a real estate brokerage in the market for more than 20 years. We operate the markets of Greater Lisbon, Cascais, Oeiras, and Alentejo. Today, our webinar will focus on the real estate investment in Portugal and practical aspects about the change of country, legal regime and tax issues for Europeans, focusing on the non-habitual resident and how to choose your next property in Portugal. I will pass to Rafael, who will talk about the real estate investment in Portugal, the properties that we have to offer, the investment in the international markets, and so on. Rafael.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. What I'm going to say is give you an overall view of the real estate market, past and present, which are completely different. Perhaps as you all know, we had a big crisis in 2008, not only on real estate, it was all the economy that went down, and the real estate was no exception, and it more or less dropped 25% in average terms. And since then, until 2012, the market dropped. And after 2013 started recovering, and since then it has recovered a lot. It recovered the loss of 25%, and then it started growing more than the level pre-crisis. So we are now in a very dynamic market. A lot of people are buying in Portugal for different reasons. Some fiscal reasons, other related to golden visa. But at this point, I think there are much more reasons than that for people to buy in Portugal. For you to have an idea, we sold to 31 different nationalities at the beginning of this year. So there is a big demand for properties in Portugal. And besides the reasons, fiscal reasons that we will talk about later, I think that there are much more interesting reasons than that. We are living a very, very good period of our country life. Our economy is doing well. We have the third more secure country in the world. Last year we were the fifth. This year we are the third more secure country in the world. We have, comparing it with other capitals and other European cities, much lower cost of life. Not only the price per square meter, it's much lower than in the rest of the other capitals in Europe, but also the cost of life. So it's not expensive to live in Portugal, and we have a great quality of life. Besides the weather, we have now a very good offer in cultural terms and in every aspect of life. But mostly, you feel good in the Lisbon area, and not only in the center of Lisbon, but also in the coast of Lisbon, Cascais and Oeiras, which are only half an hour from the center of Lisbon. So I think it's a great life that have here, and that's what other people are discovering in Portugal, a great life. And well, that's it. I think that can give you an idea of the prices per square meter now in Portugal. If you are going to the center of Lisbon, which is more or less the same price per square meter in the center of Cascais, which is the coast of Lisbon, we are talking prices between 4.5 and 10,000 euros per square meter. Of course, that you can find a very good apartment with 5,000 euros per square meter. 10,000 is the top. It's between 10 and 11 is the top, and it's the best location. So it's the range of prices that we are having now in Portugal, selling in Portugal in this area, which is of course much lower to compare with Paris or with Madrid and Barcelona. So I think it's a great opportunity to invest here. We have a lot of new developments. We are promoting a lot of new developments. We had more or less 18 launches of developments only this year. So there is a great activity, and I think it's a great opportunity to buy here. I'm available for questions that you have, but now I'm going to listen and to Luis what he has to say about the non-resident program.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm trying not to bore you to death on one issue, which is taxes. So at 10:30 in the morning, at least in Lisbon time, talking about taxes is not the most enthusiastic thing in the world, for sure. So let's talk about how not to pay taxes, which is a lot better than talking about taxes. The NHR program is a program for people that become Portuguese tax residents. So a common question that we normally get is, do I have to live in Portugal to have the regime? And the answer is yes. This is a regime that is specifically designed for people that move from their current country of residence into Portugal. So for the regime to fully work to its full extent, people need to break their tax residency in the country where they are currently living in, and they need to become a Portuguese tax resident. What does it mean to be Portuguese tax resident? Portugal has basically two criteria. First criteria, you need to spend more than 183 days in Portugal in any 12-month period. So we're not only talking about the calendar year, we're talking about any 12-month period within the period that people are living in Portugal. They need to spend 183 days in Portugal. But people are also tax resident in Portugal if in any day of the year their main place of residence is in Portugal. And that's where real estate kicks in. So as long as a person has bought a house in Portugal or a flat in Portugal, that is the main place of residence, or a person has rented a house in Portugal or a flat, that is its main place of residence, a person will become Portuguese tax resident under Portuguese domestic law. Does this mean you need to live 6 months in Portugal? Actually, no. You can live less than 6 months per year in Portugal, just don't qualify as tax resident in any other country. So if the idea is to spend 5 months in Portugal, and then for the remaining 7 months of the year, you want to live in 7 different countries, Portugal will work. If you want to stay 7 months in the country where you're currently living in and only spend 5 months in Portugal, bad news. The NHR program will not work because you really need to break tax residency where you are currently at. Being tax resident, you can then apply for the program. We are a country of bureaucracy. Welcome to Portugal. That means that the regime will never be automatic. You will always have to ask for the regime. Although you qualify for the program, you'll have to ask for it. Who can ask for the regime? Anybody, no matter what they do, whether they are an investor, an employee, self-employed, whatever they do, As a person becomes Portuguese tax resident, they are eligible and can ask for the NHR program as long as in the previous 5 complete tax years, they were not a resident of Portugal. Sometimes we hear that the program is for foreigners. No, the program is applicable regardless of nationality, and the program is applicable regardless of country of origin of the individual. As long as the individual moves to Portugal and becomes tax resident, and in the full 5 tax years before that were not residents in Portugal, they can apply for NHR program and they will be NHRs in Portugal, as long as they ask for the regime. And as everything, there is a deadline to ask for it. And the deadline is always the end of March of the year after the year you move. So if you're still planning to move to Portugal this year, you can do it. You can become Portuguese tax resident until the end of the year, and you'll have to apply for the NHR program up until the end of March of 2018. If you move in the beginning of the year of 2018, then you'll have until the end of March 2019 to ask for the NHR program. And these are the only criterias you need to apply for to become Portuguese NHR. Doesn't matter if you're retired, if you're an employee, or what you do. With this, you will be NHR, and you'll be NHR for 10 complete tax years. What are the benefits of the NHR regime? What's in it for whoever moves into Portugal? The program has essentially 2 types of benefits for people moving into Portugal. One is a flat 20% rate on employment and self-employment income on certain activities. At the time the regime was created, 2009, the Minister of Finance in Portugal said, the regime is not for Ronaldos. And the idea was, we do not want anybody moving into Portugal to apply for the 20% rate. They can be NHRs, and they will benefit from the rest of the program. They will just not have the 20% rate on employment and self-employment income. So there's a list of activities that benefit from this 20%. And the list includes musicians, artists, engineers, high-end people working within organizations, doctors, university professors. But for example, it does not include people from sports. So if you want to move into Portugal and work in Portugal under either an employment contract or a self-employment contract, you will only have the 20% rate if the activity you perform is listed on a ministerial order that exists since 2010. The second part of the program has been the part that has been more interesting for most of the people moving into Portugal. Portugal grants exemptions on foreign-sourced income, but it's not on all foreign-sourced income. We always have to look at type of income and country of source to determine if some income or some capital gains are exempt or not. Let's face it, if the regime was easy, I would not have a job. So what we'll always have to look at is, what is the type of income? What is the country of source of income? Main features about the regime, which has attracted probably 70 to 80% of the people that have moved into Portugal. Retirement. From the Portuguese law standpoint, any income from abroad that is a retirement pension will be exempt in Portugal. It doesn't matter the country of source. It doesn't matter the origin of the pension. Foreign pensions are fully exempt in Portugal during the 10 years of the NHR. Under most treaties signed by Portugal, the country of source of the pension cannot tax that pension. So for example, the UK and a private UK pension that cannot be taxed in the UK and under the Portuguese NHR regime is fully exempt in Portugal. So for 10 years, UK pensions from private origins will not be taxed in Portugal or in the UK. Same thing with France, same thing with Sweden. And these are some of the most popular countries where people have moved from their countries into Portugal. Apart from pensions, there are also exemptions on investments that under the treaties can be taxed in the country of source, regardless if they are taxed or not. So for example, a UK dividend cannot be taxed under UK tax law and is fully exempt under the Portuguese NHR program. Why? Because under the treaty between Portugal and the UK can tax the dividend. The fact that the domestic UK law taxes it or not is irrelevant for our law. So UK dividends, for example, will be tax-free in the UK and in Portugal. Same thing with interest coming from Luxembourg or interest coming from Spain, which also do not tax interest paid to non-residents of those countries. And under the NHR program, they will be exempt in Portugal because they are taxable under the tax treaties with those countries. In a nutshell, if we want just to highlight the main features, dividends, interest, capital gains on real estate, foreign rental income will generally be exempt in Portugal under the NHR program. However, capital gains on securities, be it shares, bonds, units, and investment funds, those are normally taxed in Portugal because under the treaties, the country of origin does not have taxing rights over capital gains. So in a nutshell, dividends, interest, foreign capital gains on real estate, foreign rental income are exempt. Foreign capital gains on securities, normally they are taxed in Portugal at a flat 28%. One thing that really does not work with Portugal are tax havens. So any investment in a country that's blacklisted for Portuguese tax purposes, such as Gibraltar, the British Virgin Islands, Guernsey, all of those will never benefit from an exemption in Portugal. Actually, they have an increased tax rate. Instead of being taxed at 28%, they are taxed at 35%. Last but not least, foreign employment income or self-employment income. For example, if you move into Portugal and you still have a board member position outside of Portugal. That can also be exempt, but the condition is different. For foreign employment or self-employment income to be exempt in Portugal, actual tax needs to be paid abroad under the double tax treaty signed between Portugal and that country. So, for example, if you move into Portugal and you still have a board member position in Sweden, Sweden will tax that income as a board member and Portugal will grant an exemption. But if you have a board member position in the UK and you are a tax resident in Portugal, under the treaty, the UK will not tax that board member position unless you are physically present in the UK. And if you are not taxed in the UK, you will not be exempt in Portugal. And in Portugal, you will be paying tax at normal tax rates in Portugal. Practical issues about becoming a non-habitual resident. What do you need to do? Well, first of all, you need to get a property in Portugal. And to get a property in Portugal, you will either buy a property or you will rent a property. Then Rafael, considering the real estate market, will tell you all about the advantages of investing and buying real estate in Portugal. But the catch about buying real estate in Portugal is that in Portugal, if you want to buy real estate or if you want to rent a house, you'll need to be registered as a tax resident in Portugal. Or at least you'll need to have a tax number in Portugal. To have a tax number in Portugal, you need to have an address in Portugal. To have an address in Portugal, you need to have bought or to have rented a house in Portugal. But to do that, you need a tax number. Our life is brilliant around here. To break this vicious cycle, you need to first register as a non-resident in Portugal. That is the first step of moving in. You first register as a non-resident. You will provide your address in the country where you're currently living in. Then you will have a 9-digit tax number in Portugal, which will be the most important number you'll ever have when you move into Portugal. You'll need it for anything you do. And then you will either buy or rent. After that, you move into Portugal physically. You start living in Portugal, and then you start all of the applications. You will register with the Portuguese Tax Authority's website. You will receive passwords. You will access the website. You will have to ask for the NHR program. It will be issued, if everything is okay, within 2-3 days. We've had some cases where it's issued within 2-3 hours. And then every year, you need to file a Portuguese tax return. You have to report your worldwide income even if it's fully exempt in Portugal, you have to report it. And every year on the tax return, you need to claim the exemptions. So although you are resident of Portugal, although you are registered as NHR, although on the return you report your foreign income, you also have to ask for the exemption, or else you will receive a not so nice tax bill from the Portuguese tax authorities assessing tax on income that should be exempt but is not, just because you did not ask for the exemption on the return. Portugal right now qualifies as top 2 within the EU in terms of marginal tax rates. We are only beaten by Sweden at this point. Our maximum rate this year is 56.21%, expected to go down to 53% next year. So it's really key and really important that you get proper tax advice and you comply with all of the paperwork and you apply for all of the exemptions. And at this stage, I think this is the briefest presentation I can do on the NHR program. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Luis. Now we'll open our Q&A session. Please write your comments or questions in the comments box. We already received some questions, so I'll start with Rafael. Can you talk about the changes of the Portuguese real estate markets and the rental markets?
Yeah, changes are already spoke about. I think a big change from the past 5 years. Because of the demand coming from abroad. So for you to have an idea, this year we will sell more or less 300 properties here in Portugal, and of those, more or less 70% will be sold for foreign people, only 30% for Portuguese buyers. It was worse some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, when we only had 15% of properties sold to Portuguese. The others were foreigners. So this shows you how strong is the demand coming from abroad, which is nice because we always have new markets, always have new people looking at Portugal, and always renovate the markets. Something that we do for a long time. We search for new markets for the past 15 years. So it's our specialty, going abroad and bring people in. So, but answering to your question, we are living very, very dynamic market, in a very dynamic market. So it's good.
Thank you. And tell us a little bit more about the procedures. For example, I am an UK resident. I want to come to Portugal. I call you. I call Porto de Frente Christie's. What can you do for me?
Yeah, the first thing we do is to qualify your needs. So we have a conversation, normally to England. We have a conversation and the qualification of your criteria and what are you demanding. And we start sending you some properties for you to select the ones that are interesting. And when you come here, you will only see the properties that you choose. And so it's a process that starts at distance, and then when you come here, we'll see the properties that you choose. And not only the properties, but to know the neighborhoods, which is very important, because someone that lives abroad doesn't know where to live. If you want to live in the center of Lisbon, or if you prefer to live in the coast of Lisbon, which is a completely different kind of life, or relaxed. We have 7 golf courses around Cascais. So that is balance that you have to do and to choose where you want to live. So it's not only important to see the properties, but only to know neighborhoods and to know qualities of each neighborhood. And but that's what we do. We show people and show our clients those rules, qualities, and characteristics of insurance.
So I'm in Portugal. I talked to Luis, who advised me on tax issues. I talked to Portugal friend, and now I've already bought a house. Do you have any service you can help me to do the contracts, water contracts, furniture, anything?
Yeah, we take care of everything. We have a service that provides all those services that you mentioned. So if someone lives abroad, he doesn't have to be concerned about any aspects in the process.
Luis, I have one client that says, I already bought one apartment in Portugal and I'm interested to know more about the tax system for eventual further investments.
Well, the tax regime in Portugal really depends on your tax residency status and the type of income you have. Well, I'm assuming that the person that's asking the question is currently a non-resident of Portugal. As non-residents of Portugal, investments on real estate are always taxable in Portugal. The tax rate is 28%, be it a normal rental income or a capital gain on the sale of a real estate. The main difference is that on the capital gain of a real estate, the person is taxed on the difference between the sales price and the acquisition price corrected by inflation. This is what we always do on the acquisition value. On top of that, you can deduct all of the mandatory acquisition and sales costs that you had, commissions, real estate tax, stamp duty that you bought on the acquisition of the property. And you can also deduct all of the refurbishments made on the property during the last 12 years. You need to keep your invoices to make sure that then you can prove to the Portuguese tax authorities that you did do all of those refurbishments. In terms of rents, you can tax, or you are taxed on the net between the gross amount of rents you received and all of the costs that you incurred with annual maintenance of the property, with, for example, advertising that you did on the property, and you're taxed at 28%. In both cases, you always have to file a Portuguese tax return every year, and then most likely you will have to report this income also in your country of residence and claim either an exemption in your country or a foreign tax credit, and that will depend on the tax system of the country where you're currently living in.
Rafael, I'm looking to invest in Lisbon, but I'm being advised about the recent market prices. Are they too high? Is this just a phase?
Yeah, I believe that the prices in Portugal raised for the past 5 years. One of the reasons are already told, is because we had a drop of 25% in the prices during the crisis. So we recovered that 25%, and then the price is still rising because the demand is higher than the offer, and that's what happens for the past 5 years. I believe now that finally we are leveling the offer to the demand. So I believe that this next years, 2-3 years, we will have small rise in prices, but nothing like we have experienced until now. And that's because I believe that we are involved in a lot of new developments in the center of Lisbon, in Cascais. So I believe that finally the offer will be enough for the demands, and so the prices will level.
Luis, I am especially interested in how to conduct property investment in a tax-efficient structure. Example, through Portuguese and foreign companies, holding structures, trusts.
That's a fantastic question. Porta de French Christie's can send you my email address, and we can then discuss a fee estimate to look at. Well, apart from the joke, It really depends on the country where you are currently resident, and it really depends on the type of investment you want to do in Portugal. For example, if you are in the area of buying old properties in the city center and refurbishing them, then probably want to live in Portugal. Not because of the NHR program, but we have a full tax program on the refurbishment of old houses, and the regime is actually going to be extended in 2018 to any property that's more than 30 years old, where you can actually have a flat 5% of tax on either capital gain or rental income just because you are refurbishing old properties in Portugal. And for that, I would say no structure, just move. On other types of investments, it will depend on what is the amount of the investment. One thing is to invest 400,000 euros. Another is to invest 100 million euros. And for that, you could think about funds, trusts. We really need to be careful about trusts because Portugal does not recognize the existence of trusts so far, which means that a trust is basically a payment to a trustee. And it will really depend on where the trustee is located. If he's located in a tax haven, that will clearly be a no-no, not only in terms of personal income tax, but also in terms of real estate tax and annual council tax. Apart from that, it varies a lot. If you're into the buy and sell of properties, maybe a local Portuguese company will be interesting just to avoid the normal property tax that you have to pay when you buy a property. If you actually want to buy and hold, then maybe a Portuguese company will be relevant, and then you'll want to have a holding structure in a country that has participation exemption and does not tax dividends distributed to non-residents of that country. It really varies a lot based on where you live, the type of investment you want to do, and what is the amount of the investment.
I have a question that I think is to both of you. A couple in UK saying, what would you say is the number one reason why foreigners choose to purchase a home in Portugal? And what I'm asking is, do you see prospects buying mainly because of the NHR, or is the purchase related to weather, security? What do you feel about this?
Well, what I would say is that it's a combination of everything. Portugal is not the only country on planet Earth that has a special program to attract foreigners. Many countries have those. Thailand has one working for many, many years. Italy has one that started just recently. The UK itself has the Resident Dom regime. Malta has the Resident Dom regime. Many countries in the world have tax regimes. What Portugal has that's different from all of the others is that we have a good personal income tax regime. We have no wealth tax. We have no inheritance tax for direct heirs. And on top of that, we have good quality of life compared to the cost of living in Portugal. We have security. Portugal is top 3 in terms of safe countries to live in the world. And there's something that you will only know when you come here. We have, as one client said at one conference, it's his words, not mine, you have better service than you have at Côte d'Azur for a third of the price. And that says a lot about what Portugal is all about. We embrace foreigners. We receive well foreigners. We've been doing that for the last 600 years. So it's not a one factor. It's actually a combination of all of these factors.
Yeah, and I believe one thing is the most important one, that when you come live to Portugal, you become part of our community. You don't feel a part of the community. And I think that's the best asset that we have here to receive the foreigners. And this, when you spread the word, I mean, you might start for a tax program, but then you tell your friends that it's good to live in Portugal, and they come with or without the tax program.
Just to give some examples exactly on that, we had a lot of clients that moved into Portugal in 2010 to take the benefits of the NHR program, and their plan was to stay in Portugal only for 5 years, precisely because the income that they have that they wanted to generate through the NHR program would expire after 5 years. They're still living here and they have no plans of going back.
Luís, if we plan to stay as tax residents outside Europe, for example Dubai, but buy a property to spend up to 180 days per year in Portugal, can we remain as non-taxed residents?
As long as you don't stay more than 183 days in Portugal in any 12-month period, you will clearly be non-resident of Portugal.
I intend to live in Portugal in 2018 after selling our property in South Africa, and my wife is a Portuguese national and I hold a British passport. So am I eligible to the NHR program?
The only, I would give thumbs up to both of you, so I would not see any problem in either of you becoming NHR under the Portuguese regime. I would just be cautious about the Portuguese national. The issue that we've had with Portuguese nationals is our national card, which is called Cartão de Cidadão, which is our national ID. Most people do not realize that our national ID card is directly linked to the Portuguese tax authorities. And sometimes when people ask for their national ID or they renew their national ID card, they, for some reason that I don't understand, give their Portuguese address. By doing so, they are communicating to the Portuguese tax authorities that they are tax residents in Portugal. So for your wife, that is a Portuguese national, and most likely will have a Portuguese ID card, what I would do is take a look at how her registration currently is, how it has been for the last 5 years, and if for some reason she is registered as resident in Portugal, just sit back, relax, because you'll have 1 year of arguments with the Portuguese tax authorities to prove that she lived outside of Portugal the last 5 years. But it will be doable. We've had a very high success rate in those cases, but we will need to build a case.
Yeah. Do you feel that there is a pattern in these international clients? They seek property more in Lisbon, more in Cascais, Oeiras?
Yeah, I think they're looking at little different kind of clients and with little different expectations. There are clients that buy properties here only for the investment and to put it in the rental market, which is good investment at this point because there are a lot of demand for rentals. And there are clients that are moving in, so most of them are moving into Portugal. The couple, they want perhaps a small apartment in the center of Lisbon. If it is a family with kids, perhaps they will prefer to have a villa in Cascais area or Oeiras, where are the villas available in the market. So I think that we have completely different kind of interests and of needs, I would say. So I believe that we can cover all the needs.
Just received an email for Luís. I own properties in London which are rented out and generate a rental income. These properties now have a capital gain as they have been rented out for a few years. Luís mentioned that rental income on foreign real estate is exempt. However, in the UK, there is a non-resident landlord status, which I believe means tax on rental income needs to be paid in the UK even if you live abroad. Can Luís comment on whether this also applies to the NHR regime?
Well, the NHR regime is a Portuguese regime. So each time I'm talking about exemptions, I'm talking about domestic Portuguese law, which means that people are exempt in Portugal. This does not mean that people are exempt in the country of source of the income. I gave the example of pensions that are not taxed in Portugal and the country of source, not on rental income. The UK will continue to tax your UK rental income, and it will just be exempt in Portugal. In that sense, the NHR program enables you to move into Portugal without Portugal creating an additional tax burden on foreign income.
Another one for Luís. We are planning to invest in real estate in Lisbon and would appreciate to know tax and all other implications for EU citizens that will not have principal residence in Lisbon, but in our own country.
Okay, well, I mentioned the tax on the income that you generate from the real estate already. So probably what's also worthwhile knowing is the annual tax that you need to pay while having a property in Portugal, which basically is council tax, which will depend on the tax value of the property and the municipality of the property. Each city hall can choose within a small window the annual tax that you need to pay. It's between 0.35% and 0.5% roughly per year on the tax value of the property. And then we have an additional council tax for real estate that's above 600,000 euros in terms of tax value, which is an additional that you will have to pay. And if you're a couple, you can choose to pay the additional only above 1.2 million euros. And these are annual taxes that you'll have to pay just for having real estate in Portugal.
You have the acquisition tax, which is important to mention because it's a progressive tax now, and that reaches its highest point in 550,000 euros, which is 6%. So
plus 0.8 of stamp duty.
Yeah, and so you can roughly count with 6.9% for everything when you buy a property here in Portugal, if it is above 550,000 euros. If it's lower than that price, well, it's progressive, so it depends on the
value.
Yeah.
Rafael, we know that Porto de France is a Christie's affiliate since 2012. Can you tell us about that partnership, how it is important to Porto de France have this brand beside us?
It's not only a brand, it's a network that allows us to reach different markets all around the world and to have a branch in those countries. And it's very important for our clients to know that if that they can reach any Christie's office at their country and ask for a property in Portugal, or contact us directly if they want. But of course, it's important for them to feel security and to feel that they are in the hands of a company that has very strict rules how to attend the clients and how to manage all the business that we do.
We are ready to close the session. I just need to say thank you for all the participants who joined us. We will send the newsletter to all the participants with the Deloitte presentation, I think,
yes,
and the Porto de France presentation. We will also share with you a platform where you can do a simulation for your next property. So feel free to send any questions, emails, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much. Hope to
Thank
see
you.
you soon
Have a nice
in
day.
Portugal.
Thank
Bye.
you.